This is my now 2-year-old LEGO Briggs Stratton 5 horsepower model engine. It was over a year ago that I attempted to make it run off a vacuum with, well, suboptimal results. And over the past year, I've made quite a few vacuum engines, and I think I've majorly improved at building them. So I'm going to give this another shot. The idea behind this project is to see what it will take to get the engine to run using a vacuum, by making as few modifications as possible. Of course, if the engine had a smooth cylinder, a lightweight piston, and a whole grocery list of other different things, it would run great. However, those modifications kind of defeat the purpose of this project. So I have a list here with 3 tiers. The first tier is all the required modifications. These are the modifications that I will have to make to give this engine even a chance at running. These include making the camshaft 1-to-1 with the crankshaft, and rotating the lobes 180 degrees offset. I'll explain this more in a little bit. I also need to replace the crank itself because the brick-built one is far too weak and would most likely break immediately. One last thing is adding a spring to the intake valve, so the vacuum doesn't open it before it's ready. I consider these mods absolutely necessary. The next tier is level 2 mods. These include changing the 2x2 tile valve for the 3x3 disc to provide a better seal, and also making the piston lighter by removing some of the bricks and plates. I wouldn't consider these mods necessary, but I'll still allow them. The third and final tier is extra mods. These are the more outrageous mods, like replacing the cylinder with flat panels. Okay, so we have a plan laid out, let's get to work. As I said before, I need to make the camshaft 1-to-1 with the crank, meaning the camshaft turns once for every 1 turn of the crank. I also need to set the cam lobes to be 180 degrees offset. What's currently on this engine is a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning the camshaft turns once for every 2 turns of the crank. The lobes are also offset only 90 degrees. These 2 things are what make it a 4-stroke model. With these new cam modifications, the engine is now a 2-stroke, which is what almost all vacuum engines are. 1 stroke lets in air into the cylinder, another pulls the air out. While I have the cylinder off the engine, I'll also replace the crankshaft with these Technic beams, so it's a lot stronger than the brick-built one. The last thing I need to do is put a spring on the intake valve. Just so there's no confusion, the intake valve is the valve that takes air into the cylinder. Putting the spring on requires a little bit of cylinder disassembly, but it's not much. I might be back in here to adjust the stiffness on the spring if necessary. The valve lift is a bit much in this case, but I'll test it like this and maybe change it later on. It turns out the smaller flywheels were too light to keep the engine running, so I had to make them a little larger. However, I think we can get the small ones to work later on. Well, it may not be the fastest, but it sure is faster than last time. Also, just an extra test, I shortened the valve lift a little bit and gave it another test. So now let's move to tier 2, starting with the valves. I'm going to replace these 2x2 tiles with some 3x3 Technic discs. This will hopefully make a better seal and let the piston fall back down easier. I also took the original piston and removed the tiles, bottom plates, and some of the bricks. This piston is a lot lighter, so it might make at least a slight difference. Tier 2 is checked off, so let's test it again. Once again, it's definitely not the fastest engine I've built, but it's absolutely an improvement. So now it's on to the final tier. I completely rebuilt the cylinder and used these large panels as cylinder walls. I also made a few adjustments to the valve lift. Not much for this final tier, but with that done, it's time to test it again. Alright, so the small flywheels aren't enough to keep the engine running, but I did change them out for the larger ones from before, and it ran just fine. But I'm not really sure how much of an improvement these last mods were. Anyways, although this engine is not the fastest one I've ever built, it's absolutely an improvement from the previous attempt at this project. And I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. Also, check out my Discord server if you want to hang out with other LEGO lovers. And finally, check out my channel memberships if you'd like to help support me monetarily and get a couple perks for yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.